Has it been long? Like, yeah, 1 week ago. So far we have actually scratched. When I say scratched, we have scratched some aspect of object-oriented programming with PHP, and I thought it wise, or I see it necessary for us to actually touch this topic a bit, the PHP MVC. Now, this is part of design patterns, which you could also do some basic research on it and know what it's about. But basically, we will be moving into MVC. And just to say what MVC is all about, the MVC model, which is one of the design patterns in PHP that was originally formulated in 1970s. That was some long time ago. And the main purpose is to separate the business layer of your application from your view, or from what people see, or from the presentation layer. Now, let me take for example that we have our web application or web system that has what people normally see when they type in the the URL to the landing page, or when they click on a button to see some things and so on. Now, MVC, or Model View Controller, is there to separate what you see from what is actually going on in the background. Now, just as it states, we separate our application into three main components. You have the model, the view, and the controller. We'll get to all of this in due time. And this actually has a lot of advantages because it helps in code reusability. What we are opting for as we move throughout this course is that we are moving our codes towards the level where it can be really reused. When I say being reused, it can be reused by you in other projects or by other developers somewhere, right? So one of the advantage of the MVC pattern is that it supports code reusability, and it also ensures security and better application performance. Now, actually, what happens is that um, most of the times when developers or junior developers or uh, students who are just entering into development here of MVC, they get to think that MVC is really complicated. But truth is, when you actually get to learn object-oriented programming, MVC becomes something that is kind of a best practice, right? Becomes kind of a best practice. If you notice what we have been doing so far, we started with creating four different files in our first task. We're creating four different files to handle four different operations that the user reacted on your system. And then we came to a level where we created one file with four functions. And then your current task that would be for the week, sure, will have to be dealing with classes, where a class has all the methods that pertains to a particular user interaction. Okay, so MVC, back to this, will just help you to actually structure your code and help in code sharing, and it will help both the front end developer and the back end developer to work on the same system without interfering on the code that they are both working on. For example, if I am working on a user authentication, uh, that is the back end of the user authentication, the front end developer is by no means supposed to touch the back end of the code that I'm writing, right? So with MVC, you actually get to implement all of this. Um, Not talking much, I want you to take a good look at this diagram. This is practically the data flow in an MVC architecture, right? So we have a user who actually logs in. Now we have the model, we have the view, we have the controller. We actually get to see all of this. You see that the model interacts with your kind of application and the database, and it interacts with both the controller and the view. So all of these three work together. um the next thing is this. I'm just going to briefly say what these particular patterns are, the both the model, the view, and the controller, what they are all about. Now, in your MVC pattern or your MVC architecture, you have the model, which is the name given to the component that will communicate with the database to manipulate data. All right. So when we talk about the model in an MVC architecture, we are more talking more about the data layer, right? The layer that will communicate with maybe your database or communicate with your data sources, and it may have logic that actually manipulates these data sources. Now, it acts as a bridge between your view and your controller, right? What we'll actually get to see about the view and the controller, and then I'll come back to this. Now, the model is also responsible to manage the data. It stores, retrieve entities used by an application. So if your application has some uh, uh, dependence on a database, and you are working with an MVC architecture, your model actually handles everything that has to do with the database. The next thing is the view. Like I mentioned before, the view is responsible to display the data provided by your model. Okay, so since the model is like now the bridge between your database and your view, what happens is that when you request data maybe from the backend, from the database, your model actually takes care of maybe connecting to the database and getting this data and then passing it, right? So this is responsible for mapping the graphics onto a device. A view attaches to a model and renders its content to display, surface, and formats the data to be presented to the user. In a web application, as an HTML output, for example, just as we have earlier been talking about, our view is more of the presentation layer, taking into consideration that it won't present any data if it has not linked to the model. So your view actually links to the model and gets the data that it needs and then formats it and displays it, right? The next thing is going to be the controller, and this could be like the middleman to some extent between your model and your view. A controller is the means by which the user, interact with the application. It also, what it does is this: it accepts the input from you, the user, and instructs the model and the view to perform actions based on your input. Right. If you have noticed what I did in most of your projects, your mini projects, you discover that there was a file called action.php, and this action.php was responsible for getting the user action, whether it was a post login, post register, or whatever. Now, if it was a login, it routes to a certain file that handles the login. So that is almost what the controller does, right? So it is responsible for routing your application, kind of, even though there are routes. When we actually get to that, this I'm just trying to say that the controller is responsible for managing the whole of your application. It is responsible for linking your view and your controller together and all of that. It handles the model and the view layers to work together. The controller receives a request from the client, invokes the model to perform the requested operations, and sends the data to the view. Yes, most of the times we get the conception that the controller will get data from the model and pass it on to the view. Yes, it is correct, but it is not it is not how do I put this? It's not like a law, right? So it is possible that your view can communicate direct with your model, but in best cases, your controller links the view and the model, right? So just a recap: what happens is your model deals with the database and database connectivity, database query. Your view deals with the presentation layer and what you are going to see on your application, and the controller helps to link your view and your model together so for a smooth functioning of the application. So this is an example of a structure of how the MVC an MVC project will look like. Okay, so you have your project kind of kept into folders. For example, you have the controllers, you have the models, and the views. So if, for example, you have a whole project that has user, you go have the user controller, and you have the user model, and you have the user view. All of these you are going to actually see maybe as we progress, maybe when we even enter at the level of frameworks, you actually get to understand it. But this is just a basic view or a basic overview of the MVC architecture, how it looks like. Now I'm going to actually just show you a little code here that kind of handles some um, model view controller kind of thing, right? So you have the model here in this case, which is a class. Let me try to get to it. So you have the model, which is a class file that contains a database connectivity. In this case, we have not connected to the database, right? With time, maybe in our projects that are coming ahead, we'll actually get to do things that connect to the database. But let's just consider that this model has a database, and this database is a simple text, right? So assume that this is some data, right? And the text has a constructor, and this model has a constructor that initializes this text, hello world. Now you have the next one, which is the controller. And if you actually see what is happening, we are starting our constructor here, which is calling the model. Okay, it is calling the model and is instantiating the model, so that when we go to our view and we call the controller, while calling the controller, we know that our controller has the model. Okay, so if you actually get to understand this, you see that you have your model, right, which handles database connectivity. You have your controller, which deals with some logic and tries to link your model and the view. And that is why within your constructor here, you have a model instantiated within the constructor, so that whenever we call the constructor, we know that we have the model already in it. Okay, then you have the view layer here, which now kind of links all of this together. We have the model, the view, and then since we have our view simply just picks in the model, and then we have one method here that prints an output to the user, and this output prints out the text. Where is this text coming from? It is coming right at the level of the model. You see that your data has moved from your model to your controller, then to the view. Okay, so what is left under here are just some instantiation. We are instantiating a new model and a new controller and a new view. Then we are trying to print out the view. Let me check if I have my code editor here to switch to it. Um, okay, so I'm going to actually open the folder. I'm going to go to PHP, for example, yeah, because that is where our projects are, and I have a folder for PHP MVC. Good. So we open this folder here so that I can actually show you it's the same code that I was trying to explain on the screen, just for us to actually see. So we have our basic project, we have the model, we have the view, we have the controller, right? And if you notice, there are simple files inside. Now, my model, like I was saying, my model simply initializes some piece of data, assuming that, okay, this data is coming from the database, okay? This is some piece of data. This is my model. And if you notice, it has one property called the text, This text could be, it is our data actually, and our constructor initializes this text so that immediately we load our application, this text is available at the level of the model. The next thing is the controller, right? Now, if you see our controller, we have a class called hello controller, and this controller initializes our hello model, right? It means that within this controller, we now have what? The data from the model at this level, right? Then the next thing is our view, right? Now, I'm going to just comment this for a moment, okay, so that you actually get to understand the whole of this. All right, so within this file, I've included the model and the controller. Since I am in the view, I want to get access to all of this. And then I have a private property for the model so that I'm going to actually get access to my model again. And I am using this within the constructor just again to make sure that within this view I have my model available. Then this is one method that I have defined called output, and what this method simply does is it just prints out the value from the model that we have, and our value is going to be, this is my world, right? Okay, so back to where we are. We have these classes. These classes won't make sense if we don't actually have we don't have instantiations of all of them, right? They are supposed to actually be there. So I'm going to paste back this code and uncomment it. Okay, now we have our code. We have instantiated all the three classes that has the model, the view, and the controller. This one is for the model, a new object for the model, a new object for the controller, and a new object for the view. And then our view now, since we have a new object for the view, we can now get access to the output method of this view. So that every class, when you create a class and you create an object of that class, that object also has access to all the methods, and output is one of the method of this class. So I'm going to try to actually access this. Let me see if can access it. I'll call it PHP. Okay, within that PHP, I'll go to object oriented and PHP MVC just to increase this a bit. So if I get to my view, you actually see this is my hello world, right? But look at something. What has happened is data has moved from the model, which we have here, hello model, to the controller, right? Then to the view. And then from this view, we have printed out the value of that data. That is basically what MVC is all about. Switching back to my editor, it is this is how MVC is, right? You have your model, which has to do with the database connectivity and the methods that can be played on the database. You have your controller, which links your model and your view together, right? And then you have your view, which is a presentation layer of your application. This is basically the MVC model, and this will be fully understood when you actually get to the level of using frameworks or even getting deep into PHP. I'll encourage you to actually get into the PHP world. I mean, do a lot of research to learn about the model view controller. But I actually think that you understand this better um, as you actually move to frameworks like Laravel and other like. But for now, what I'm going to do is there is a task for the week, and this task is actually a little bit like model view controller, though I have not fully separated it. But when you'll be doing the task, it has full descriptions of everything that you're supposed to do. You're actually going to understand all of this, right? At the moment, I think this is what I wanted to actually display to you people, and to make sure that you guys understand. Try as much as possible to do a lot of practice on these design patterns, because that is a core of programming, the core of object oriented programming. You can't get to understand frameworks when you don't know these design patterns, right? uh I'll see you in the next video.